As I said at the top of the show, we're going to talk today about one of the most controversial school choice initiatives, private school voucher programs, and we have a terrific guest here today to help us understand more about it. He is Richard Kahlenburg. Richard is a senior fellow with the Century Foundation in Washington, D.C., has a lot of expertise and experience in education, civil rights, equal opportunity, has studied a lot of private school voucher programs, including looking at ours here in North Carolina. So thanks for being here today.
Oh, it's great to be with you. Thanks, Keith.
Thanks, Rick. Well, here's what I want to start out with first. We've got you for the whole show, so we're going to cover a lot of ground, which is terrific. Just private school vouchers in general, and the whole notion of vouchers and tax credits for private school education. Kind of give me the lay of the land, if you will, and where we are nationally on these kinds of efforts.
Right. Well, there are a number of states like North Carolina which have adopted private school voucher programs that allow public taxpayer funds to be used in private and religious schools. But what we're seeing now is, for the first time, really a concerted effort at the federal level through Donald Trump and his education secretary, Betsy DeVos, to nationalize this voucher idea, which is we'll get into the concerns I have about it, but it's really unprecedented in this sense that I've been looking at education for 20 years, and there are lots of debates about how much we should be spending per pupil, how we should approach teachers. But this is the whole enchilada, right? This is, are we going to have a system of public education as we know it in this country? And if President Trump and Betsy DeVos had their way, we would move to a radically different plan of privatization of our public schools.
Right. I mean, he talked about, the budget, or the skinny budget, as they call it, I guess, in D.C., is $1.5 billion to start. But he really is talking about, at least he did on the campaign trail, a $20 billion school voucher national program. I mean, those are some serious dollars. We're talking about maybe the lion's share of what's spent at the federal level in education.
Yes. So this is, and the context is, as he's proposing expansion of private school vouchers, he's simultaneously cutting dramatically the federal education budget. He's talking about a 13% cut. So these two things go together. You see diversion of money to private schools. So I think we're in a really volatile situation for the future of our public schools.
Let's get into look, I've read your reports. In fact, I think we're going to pop up on the screen your latest report. I've got it right here. America needs public school choice, not private school vouchers. So, I mean, safe to say you're not a fan of this sort of move. So, but tell us why, and sort of what's your concerns about privatization and things like private school vouchers.
Right. Well, I've got several concerns. To begin is that diversion of money from public schools, where 90% of students now attend, to private education. So there's going to be a trade-off. We're going to be moving funds from the schools that people are using now. We'll see increased class sizes potentially, other problems related to decreases in funding.
Right.
In addition, I'm very concerned about the lack of accountability in the private school sector. So that can mean we won't have the same requirements necessarily that students are learning, and we also won't have the same civil rights protections. It's important to remember that public schools accept everyone. There are no racial, economic, religious tests. That's not true of private schools that receive public funding. So you, for example, in North Carolina have the Fayetteville Christian school that in its handbook says if you are Muslim, if you're Jewish, if you're Hindu, if you're Mormon, don't bother applying.
You're not welcome.
You are not welcome, and that's not something we want. The kind of message I think we want to send in a democratic society.
And this is a school in which we actually highlighted the list, and I think we'll have it later in the show. One of our commercial breaks, the top schools, that academy and several, where 93% of our schools in North Carolina that receive vouchers are religious schools, either primarily evangelical Christian or Muslim academies. Some of those have received already $1 million in taxpayer funds just in the last 2 years.
That's right.
So we're not talking about a small. What else?
Well, I'm also concerned that the basic mission of private schools is not to promote our democracy. We've seen a disturbing decline in the support for democratic values in American society. So if you look at polling, it finds that among young people, actually a quarter now say that democracy is a bad or very bad system for running a society.
Right.
I mean, it's an astounding figure to
is.
me. And the problem, or one of the concerns about private school vouchers, is that if you're an Islamic school, if you're a Christian school, if you're a Jewish school, your mission is not to promote democratic values. It's to instill a love of God. And that's fine. I think that's totally appropriate. But if we want our democracy to survive, we want to make sure that students are learning why democracy is important and to really gain that love of democracy.
Which is something you see as a unique role of the public school system. That's something that was why it was established, and that is one of the sort of critical missions, correct?
Yes. Now, if you go back to the founders of public education in this country, Horace Mann, and even further back to the founders of the Constitution, they wanted an educated populace, not so much to develop skills for the workforce because it was an agrarian society and that wasn't the chief mission. They were deadly worried about a demagogue coming in and diverting democracy. That was, this was
Wow.
a new experiment. We're going to have self-governance, which hadn't happened before in recent times. And so they were really concerned about making sure people were educated well, both to understand the Constitution, love the Constitution, and also to be able to discern people who were hucksters versus those who were.
That's a great history right there. We got to go to commercial break, but when we come back, I want to talk further about possible solutions. We're not just here to talk about what we don't like. We're going to talk about some things that you think would be good for the country and for the state. So when we come back, we'll have a lot more conversation with you in just a minute. But before we go to break, see if you can answer this question: what percentage of U.S. students attend public schools?